Hey everybody, it's Aaron here with Robert, and welcome to Get Your Geek On. And today we are reviewing the newest film in the MCU, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We just saw it last night.
Oh my goodness.
Oh gosh.
We're talking about this movie. We are going to do non-spoilers first, then we're going to shift into spoilers. So,
Okay.
we'll just talk non-spoilers for a while so that, people that haven't seen the movie can watch this review and get a little bit of a sense for what they're in for without getting anything spoiled. And then, yes, we will talk spoilers because there's a lot that happens in the movie that we want to talk about. But first off, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, directed by Sam Raimi. We've got Benedict Cumberbatch, Elizabeth Olsen, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Benedict Wong, Xochitl Gomez, Rachel McAdams, and I won't mention any other names.
Yeah.
We bring back our main cast, and of course, Xochitl Gomez is playing America Chavez, so that's our big new character.
Yes.
And just as the movie gets started, we get introduced to her. She is a multiversal traveler, and something is after her, trying to basically steal her powers. And multiple Doctor Stranges get involved. Multiple versions of other characters are involved as well. And it's a crazy horror-like romp through the MCU and several universes in it. And what are your initial thoughts? How'd you feel about the movie?
My initial thoughts watching it, I loved it. But then hours later sinking in, and I'm trying to go to sleep because I've been up since like 5 hours now, 6 hours. In other words, guys, I've been up since like early morning by the time we record this. I've thought about it and I'm like, it's okay. It was a great film still. I don't think it was up there yet, and I do have some issues. But overall, I loved sitting there. It captured me for that moment, which is what it's supposed to do. Let's face it. It's supposed to hold my attention, and it did. It's supposed to drag me into the story. It did. But afterwards, I had enough time to see, like, wait, some flaws here that aren't adding up for me.
Yeah.
And there were some things like we talked about right afterwards. I don't want to mention names, but certain things didn't look right. I thought they were okay.
Yeah.
Like you said, they could have been. That was crappy. I think it was one of your words for something in it. But I will say I did like the cinematic. I liked the colors. I liked how her powers looked. I did like some of the outfits for certain characters. I did like the story to an extent. I wish something else would have happened, which maybe we'll get into the spoiler part instead. I'll talk about that. But overall, it is one of the better films, I think.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question before we get started.
One question.
Right. So we're not talking Marvel or comics. I want to focus just on MCU, right? Do you know anyone that is a bigger MCU geek than me?
Personal level, no.
Okay.
On a personal level, no. Okay.
I am not a big fan of this movie.
Really?
I think that similar to you, I didn't dislike it while watching it. There was enough going on that I was engaged and I was watching the movie. But the more I reflect on the characters, their motivations, the plot and how it moved forward, there's a lot of holes in this. There's a lot of things that I'm concerned with that I don't feel like were handled at a level that Marvel is used to handling them at.
Right.
It really felt like one of the weaker films on an emotional level. Like one of the things that I love about certain Marvel movies is they really capture you from an emotional standpoint. Even though Captain Marvel, I think as a movie isn't necessarily great, there are some genuine emotional moments in that movie where I'm, really invested in the character and invested in what's going on. We get that montage of her, getting back up after getting knocked down. Like, that's an emotional moment for me. Like, I'm really tied in. And I just didn't have any of that in this movie. There were no characters or moments where I really was feeling that emotion. I know there were a couple times where they tried to, and we're going to probably talk about those more in spoilers than in non-spoilers, but I just didn't feel it as much as I wanted to. And so ultimately the movie just kind of landed flat for me. It's the first movie I will say since Eternals that I don't feel like, man, I want to rush out and see it again. I want to watch it again. It's kind of one of those where I already am souring on it just like from watching it. And I feel like rewatches are not going to make it better. Like it's like, oh, I'm going to watch this again. And like the first Doctor Strange, I didn't love it the first time I saw it, and rewatching it, I like it better, especially in the wake of Doctor Strange's character in Infinity War, his kind of arc there. I really like that first movie a lot better. It's gotten better on rewatches. This one, I'm concerned. I could be wrong. But I'm concerned that I won't really like it on rewatches, that I'll just notice more and more things that I don't like about it. And that's not to say that the characters or the actors themselves are doing bad jobs. I think actually, for the most part, the actors are all doing a really good job. I think Benedict Cumberbatch does a good job. Elizabeth Olsen, I think, does a fantastic job. But I just think the material, especially with the way the plot worked, just really kind of let this movie down. So visually, it's very fascinating, but as an MCU fan, I was not a big fan of this movie. I felt let down, especially with some of the direction it took, especially in the second and third acts. Like I thought the first act was pretty solid, and as we got into the second and third acts, I was definitely disappointed by some of the choices that were made.
And see, I think that's where I agree with you. I mean, my problem is there's very few films in general that hit me on an emotional level because I have no soul. We've already gone over this. So, but yeah, I mean, overall, there's very few films. I think that's why I always cling to Spider-Man, because that's an emotion I can cling to because of what's happened in my life.
Sure.
So it's like, I think that's why he's my go-to and why those stories can hit me harder. But yeah, I thought it was just me. Honestly, I was like, maybe it's just me. Like, I don't have any connection to this. And to be honest, I kind of almost feel he has the Iron Man complex again, where he's not really growing still. Like we had a little like force feed me that growth right at the end. So throughout the whole film, he seemed very same.
Yeah, I think my problem is his arc has kind of felt all over the place. In Doctor Strange, it's one thing, and in Infinity War, it changes, and then in Spider-Man No Way Home, it changes again, and now in this movie, it feels like it's and so it just feels like his growth has really been kind of stunted and shifted and moved around. It's like the same thing. The same thing goes for Wanda. Her, like where she goes in this movie, I feel like was poorly established and set up, and it's like there are explanations, and when we get to spoilers, we'll talk about, okay, what could the possible explanations be for some of the choices characters make, but those aren't explicitly said, and I feel like they're relying on you to make the jump with them. And this is a movie that I didn't want to make the jump with them. I went, you know what, I'm not on board with this turn. It just didn't feel like it was true to the character. And again, we'll talk about that in spoilers for all of the characters. I mean, I felt like Wong was done dirty in this movie. I felt very disappointed by what happened with him. Doctor Strange a little bit. I think it's no surprise that there are cameos. We're not going to spoil those here. We'll talk about those in spoilers. But there's some cameos, just like in Spider-Man No Way Home, we get some, multiversal actors, playing different roles and things like that. And so again, we're not going to spoil what they are, but we'll talk about them in spoilers. And I felt like where in that movie, it was handled beautifully, and we really cared about not just our heroes, but our villains, and we really had a connection to all of those multiversal characters. In this movie, it felt more like fan service than just like it didn't feel like it was as important to the narrative as it was in Spider-Man. Like in this movie, it was like, oh, we're just gonna give this character to the fans because they're gonna love it, and it kind of felt hollow. because
Right.
of that. And so even though it was cool to see some of those characters and some of those actors, it was also like, really, that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah. And
So
that's a little bit we're
again,
gonna get with them, it felt like. You know, I was like,
yeah, I found myself being very disappointed by the direction it took. And I wonder, you never know. I wonder how much of this was affected by the pandemic with the reshuffle. Remember, this movie was supposed to come out before Spider-Man No Way Home. And so there's rumors that, America Chavez was supposed to be the one helping, to maybe get those Spider-Men from their universes. Obviously, she's
right.
not in that movie at all. So, I don't know what may have changed because of the shuffle, because of
Yeah.
pandemic and things like that. And maybe there was a better version of this in some other multiverse.
Well,
But
I
for
mean,
me,
yeah.
I didn't love this particular movie. I wanted
And
to, and I didn't.
and I'm kind of hoping in the sense you're right. If it was supposed to come out before Spider-Man, right? And no spoiler, in the first act, he makes a comment. Well, we know a little bit about the multiverse because of Spider-Man. So it's like,
Which
wait, go for it.
the ending of that movie was that he would forget about,
Well,
so I'm confused, because I guess he forgot that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but he
yeah,
still remembers the adventure and remembers that it involved the multiverse. I don't know.
exactly.
It was a little
Well,
bit confusing.
it is, and that's where, like I said, that whole ending for it was odd for Spider-Man for me, because now it's like, okay, so what do you see? Because in the comics, they comment that when they tried to focus on who the person is after a spell like that, it's just a blurred face. That's all they can see, and they could never get past that blurred line. So
Right.
it's one of those, like, it would have been better if he comments, he's like, man, I can't remember his name. I can't remember his face anymore. Like, that would have been like, oh, okay, you at one point you knew who he was, but for some reason it's blocked now.
Yeah.
And that would have been okay for me as a fan service, because it's just a line that we throw away. Like, yeah, his face is it's like blurry to me. But yeah, Spider-Man had something to do with it. And I think that's what they're going to run with, is that, like you said, he remembers the adventure, but he doesn't remember the face of the person.
Right.
And I don't know, but like you said, that's a reshoot, and maybe that's why the storytelling is a little off, because they had to go and do reshoots. They had to like fix everything. I don't know. I am curious on what happens, and I would like to see kind of like a director's cut, like we did with some of these other films. Like, I always reach to Daredevil with Ben Affleck. The director's cut isn't great, but it is better than the theatrical release. And maybe we'll get something like that. Maybe they're gonna be like, hey, Sam Raimi's like, I got a director's cut I'm gonna release, because
I mean, Marvel doesn't, the MCU doesn't do that. The MCU will give you they'll give you deleted scenes, which may or may not be canon. It's like you can kind of interpret them as, okay, that did happen just off screen, or you can say it didn't ever happen. They can kind of play fast and loose with deleted scenes. But no, I don't expect we're going to get a recut of this movie. I mean, this is the movie they gave us. And, I will say, we talked a little bit at the beginning, this is kind of horror light. Sam Raimi is kind of known for some horror and like horror comedy, visual gags, things like that. We do have a lot of creatures. We have demons. We have, some jump scares. We definitely have, some horror sensibilities in this movie. It's not a full-on horror movie by any stretch, but there are definitely some scarier elements in this movie. And so, if you do have, children, even teenagers, and it's PG-13, but this might be too scary for some 13-year-olds. And maybe not
out of the theater, we talked about that.
Yeah, my wife is like firmly like, I will, but she also doesn't like horror stuff at all.
No.
But
I see Robert when his daughter's older be like, don't tell your mom, we're taking you to see.
No. I know, definitely not. But it does have some scary elements. So depending on your kid's sensibilities, this might not be a movie that you take them to see.
Yeah.
It's not as, it's one of the darkest pieces of content we've gotten from the MCU. And like Doctor Strange, frequently encounters a lot of, crazy demonic creatures and things like this. So it's not out of character. But it certainly is a little bit of a new direction for the MCU. So anyways, I think we need to get into spoilers.
Yeah, so
Before we do that,
yeah.
before we do that, we need to, give our
rating.
scores.
Yes.
And talk, again. So I'll go first. Again, I didn't love this movie. It's a bottom tier MCU movie for me. I mean, there's 28 movies. It's not the worst. It's not, Iron Man 2 or Thor 2 level. And it's still very pleasing to look at. There's still a lot of good,
no bad wigs
going on.
No bad wigs.
I didn't notice any. And so ultimately, I'm going to give this about a 6.2 out of 10. I did find myself disappointed by it. I don't think I'll revisit it. Certainly as frequently as a lot of other MCU movies. It wasn't the rousing, fan pleasing type of movie that a lot of the MCU is, and that's a new direction. And I can appreciate that. I just thought it lacked in some of the execution. So, ultimately, I for MCU fans, you need to see it because you want to be a completionist. But this is not my favorite corner of the MCU.
And the sad thing is, going with that, we did our review of like all the films a while back. I almost feel like this is one you can skip because there's no tie-in really to anything else. It's not leading into
we'll have to see. I mean, we'll have to see. We don't know.
As of right now, it doesn't. Then I'm going to say it that way. As of right now, it's a skip for me. And again, if you like Sam Raimi, if you like the visual, like seeing pretty colors and visual effects on everything, go watch it. I tend to agree with you. I'm going to give it a 6.5 just because, again, the graphics, the look brought me in. And for that moment, I was drawn into the film. And maybe I was drawn in because I wanted to see what cameos we were getting, who we were going to get, what we were going to see. Because when those things happened, I was happy for those things. But again, hours later, not even 24 hours later now, I look back and I'm like, was this as good? And not unfortunately, because I love doing this. Tomorrow or Sunday, I'll be seeing it with my kiddo. So I'm going to see it a second time. I'm going to take her to see it. And I'm going to kind of gauge her reaction too. Like, fresh pair of eyes, someone who doesn't know anything about the comics. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but the Illuminati, all that stuff, we've heard Charles. I wonder how that's going to take when she sees all of that. Is she going to be like, oh, this is awesome? Or is she going to be more like, Dad, who's this guy? Who's that guy? Why is this guy matter? And that's why I'm wondering if, again, right now, if she skipped this film, it may not affect anything that she watches down the road. Like you said, maybe down the road we'll get a revisit of some of this stuff. But right now, it's almost a skip for me. Like you said, completionist, go see it. If you're a Sam Raimi fan, go see it. If you're a Bruce Campbell, if you want to see him, I'm going to say that at least. I don't care if spoiler or not. Go see that because I love him.
Bruce Campbell always shows up.
Yeah. But yeah, let's move on to the spoilers so I can really get into certain things. And I know you've said last night you had something that you wanted to say. So moving on to this point forward, guys, it is spoilers. So if you're done hearing our review, go check out the film or skip it. I don't care. I think you could live with it or live without it. For now, maybe next year I'll be eating those words. Who knows?